Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our session on extractivism and indigenous rights in India in this very interesting conference, activist conference against mining. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on. I live in Melbourne on the land of the Wurunjeri people. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and it always will be Aboriginal land. I'm very happy to have two friends, former colleagues from India who are the panelists for today. Without any further ado, I'll just quickly introduce them. Can I have the slide, please? So yes, I am, of course, your moderator, Ruchira Talukdar. Some of you might have come to my session yesterday. At the moment, I'm a doctoral candidate at UTS, finishing my thesis in approximately 14 days. My thesis compares coal conflicts in India and Australia and environmental movements. So much of what we're talking about today relates to what I do, and I try to connect these two different worlds. I have come from the environment movement in India and have worked with professional environmental NGOs over here, which does inform my perspective about both of these countries. Can we change the slide? Sorry, bit of housekeeping before I introduce the panelists. We are going to be muting all participants and we will first hear from our speakers and have discussion time. The plan is that they present, they will have presentations. That's going to take around half an hour. And then I'm going to ask them 3 questions. And after that, we'll have around 45 minutes for audience questions. And please put your questions in the comment box. We'll be collecting them and then, bring them up at the end. Next slide, please. So Priya Pillai is a friend of mine and she is doing her PhD too at the moment at UTS. But most of her life she's been, and she still is, an activist who works on the ground with communities in India in mining affected areas. Priya has worked on environmental and social justice issues for 20 years. She works closely with grassroots movements and non-governmental organizations that focus on climate and energy, the right to food, gender equality, and forest rights. She has worked with Greenpeace, the Right to Food Campaign, ActionAid, and Oxfam. She is proud of her role in securing forest rights of the people of Mahan in the state of Madhya Pradesh. That is where I met her 6 years ago when she was leading a campaign in Mahan. Next slide. Sridhar Ramamurthy has a glorious and long record of working with communities on the ground. But what is also interesting is Sridhar started off as a geologist and first worked with mainstream exploration organizations in the Department of Atomic Energy and later with Oil and Natural Gas Corporation Limited. In 1985, he began working with communities, and since then he has worked on environmental and alternate technologies issues. He established the Environmental Systems Branch of Development Alternatives in New Delhi. Through his work, he has provided support for human rights and environmental litigations. He co-founded and nurtured many institutions over a long period of time, ranging from the issues of climate change, country's biggest green building company, Mine, Minerals and People, and the largest alliance of mining affected communities. He is also the co-founder of Environnex Trust in New Delhi. You will also know Sridhar, some of you, from the work that he does with communities in Goa, where Adani's power plant, which will burn coal from Carmichael, is located. So without any further delay or ado, I'm going to pass on, I'm forgetting my own slide. Just really quickly, we are operating within a framework. In India, we are kind of operating within a framework of environmental conflict, let's say, which shows many contradictions. One thing is India talks renewables internationally, but is walking coal in the sense that more and more coal mines or coal block allocations are being given out. Whether or not the coal gets mined, that's a different story. 40 coal blocks were allocated at the time when the country was going through a national lockdown because of coronavirus. India also has some of the best environmental legislations in the world, rights and forest rights of indigenous people. At the same time, it has one of the biggest scales of environmental of violations of environmental legislations, often by the government. And there is intensifying environmental conflicts on the ground, and a lot of them relate to mining, which is why we're going to look at the issues of mining today through the presentations, through the lens of all these contradictions that India holds. So now I pass on to her for the first presentation.
Yeah, can I share my screen? Thank you,
Unmute
Ruchira.
yourself. You can unmute yourself.
He's unmuted. He's unmuted.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you, Ruchira, for a very generous, introduction. Today, I'm going to talk about the Goa project of Adani. I call it the harebrained project. And recently, Adani in Australia changed its name to Bravos. Many of you would know. Perhaps they thought that it was a brave act. But what's amusing and what creates a lot of anger is that in a world that is clearly recognizing that going beyond 1.5 degrees is going to be detrimental to all of us, there is a project that actually takes coal from the indigenous lands in Australia, rails it up to the port there, takes it through the Great Barrier Reef, brings it almost 10,000 kilometers to a port in India, takes another 1,000 kilometers, nearly 1,000 kilometers on rail, produces power and exports it to Bangladesh with a transmission line of another few hundred kilometers. It has a pipeline to bring water of about 100 kilometers. And if we are going to make a power project, which is a 1600 megawatt project, then you can see the kind of footprint that we are creating today with a project like this, let alone any other kind of violations on people. Just the climate impact of such a project could be very, very huge. Just after a year, on August 31st, 2017, the Adanis somehow managed to get their environmental clearance. And we challenged the environmental clearance and that in the National Green Tribunal, and the saga of these hearings continues. The next hearing is on the 16th of December. That's why we have been focusing and constantly looking at what's happening with this project. And if you see the kind of the pleading that the women did, asking Adanis not to acquire the land because everything was done illegally. Let me see if I can open the video for you. It's a very short video. It opens, or I'll get back to the video later if it doesn't easily open.
Would it be easier if you sent the link in the chat box to Andrew and he tried to open it for you, or?
Yeah, essentially to show how women are pleading to the official of Adani, falling on his feet, uh, saying that it's good fertile land, and
Are you trying to share in your screen?
yeah,
Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to press in the bottom,
Yeah.
set share.
Okay, I'll go ahead and no, because essentially I can share that subsequently. So not only it was faulty environmental clearance, there were a variety of other violations that that have been taking place. And if you see, it violated the tribal. The first thing it did was it flouted the land acquisition law. The new land acquisition law in India uh, seeks that there has to be a social impact assessment, which includes consultations with local people to assess the costs and benefits. This was rigged. The second is that even if it is declared to have a public purpose, it has to obtain consent from 80% of the landowners. Both were manipulated with the active involvement of the local government. At the time when this was being done, the central government and the state government were the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party governments. Uh, it not only flouted the land acquisition law, but one of the oldest laws protecting the tribal tenancy, called the Santal Parganas Tenancy Act. This region is called the Santal Parganas. This prohibits transfer of farmland in the area, except when it is required by the government for utilities like railways, or for burial grounds or other kind of crucial requirements. But the government overruled this law, saying that the public purpose is served because uh, producing power comes under the master list of infrastructure in the new classification by the government of India. So this kind of a flimsy reason was given to overturn a very old law. And this law itself, in the same month when this was happening, there was statewide protests, and no, because they were planning to change this law completely, and they were firing. There were 4 people killed, and then this law was the amendment to this law was withdrawn. So you find that no, the government has been hand in glove with the company to enable this company to establish such a kind of a project. Right from the beginning, when this project started, we had been through the EIA Resource and Response Center. We have been saying that it consists of fertile agricultural land, the permission to withdraw water, and the availability of water. And there were contradictions in terms of how and what kind of both source of water and the kind of coal that it will use. But the Ministry of Environment always has been dodging, or kind of saying that they have asked the proponent to give further information, and whatever the company gave, the ministry was willing to accept it. And even during the COVID, this is a very recent photograph. The fourth level girder of the powerhouse is being erected. And this whole project has been actually, the EPC contractors of the SEPCO, the power infrastructure company from China. what is interesting is, almost all the information that was provided in the environmental report was incorrect information in terms of the availability of water. And it also said that, these were rain-fed lands and not irrigated lands, and although they are and single crop land, although it was a multiple crop land. The At the time of the environmental appraisal committee did not recognize the issue of water availability. It did not recognize the issue of protests at the public hearing, and accepted the statement as a project proponent, uh, and and recommended the grant of environmental clearance. The inadequate and faulty reports is what has been the primary cause for our filing the case in the National Green Tribunal. We find that people in the area uh,
Sridhar, there's also the video that I think Stop
the
It and
video is not
witnessed.
you're not able to where do I share it? From where share?
In the bottom, you should set a bottom, set share screen.
Just a second. Just
the green thing on the bottom, Sridhar, which says
green,
shares.
The bottom, yeah.
Sometimes you need to hover over for it to appear. You need to take your mouse above it.
Sorry, I'm not.
This is on the screen where you can see all of our pictures, the gallery of pictures.
Okay.
At the bottom of all of our pictures, there are buttons. Participants chat, share screen in green. Yeah.
Do you have the link? Oh, great, it's coming.
Sorry, not this. Not this.
Yeah.
If you just maximize it, Sridhar, just maximize the video.
And the volume also. From your side, the volume in the video.
There's translation at the bottom.
All right.
So what what is currently happening in the Green Tribunal is that uh, the scope of the project has been considerably changed. Originally, they were to take water from the nearby river, but now they have changed the scope to taking it from Ganges. Then there have been the source sustainability for the water has not been studied properly. The impact on the Gangetic dolphins, the impact on otters in the river Ganges. Then, when the expansion of the port is happening in Dhamra, that's again a place where it's the breeding ground for the olive ridley turtles. Then there is uh, contradictions between different kinds of submissions that have been made by the project proponent. So the failure of the environmental appraisal committee to examine the project has been now questioned, and we are waiting for the ministry to give its own affidavits. It's not only on land acquisition, the environmental clearances. Even if you look at the concessions granted, the Central Electricity Authority and the Regulatory Commission said that Adani's power project, which is going to export power to Bangladesh, shall not come under the scope of the regulations on independent transmission systems. So you look at various kinds of ways, and now because of the kind of problems and issues that have been raised, the biggest concession that this would be the first export special economic zone, which allows for various other kind of concessions, has been granted to this project. But in reality, what we find is the Adanis have been hiding behind their inability to plan and execute this project, and despite several concessions given to them. Apart from declaring it as a SEZ, the 25% of power share it had, power production that it had to share with the state government, has also been waived off. So Adani is like the blue-eyed boy of the current government, and the kind of land grab or the kind of land that is being provided to him on the extractive sector itself is very large. Among the other recent ones is another ravage that's been going on, another coal mine where Adani is a mine development organization, where for a public sector company, he's going to mine for them, and more than 100,000 trees were chopped off. And again, this is again a indigenous belt. What we find is the actual list of scams is endless. And you can see the picture in the front where the Prime Minister flies on a Adani aircraft for his election campaign, from airports to seaports, from coal projects to import and export of diamonds. Actually, a ruling party MP calls him a great trapeze artist who's hoodwinking the banks and with all his debts. If you see, he's among the three scrap dealers who have made it very large. In the late 80s, they were all scrap dealers. Adani of the Adani Group, Anil Agarwal of the Vedanta Group, and Lakshmi Mittal of the Mittal Group, all three whom were actually scrap dealers in the 80s, late 80s, have huge kind of enterprises, all with support of government, and illegal and all illicit financial transactions. So the Goda coal burning project needs to be stopped. And I think, there is a petition on Avaz. And also you find that the kind of concessions that are being given to large corporates in India, especially hiding behind this COVID when it is difficult for people to protest, is becoming a very huge problem. And slowly, communities are trying to find ways of protesting despite the kind of high numbers of COVID incidents in the country. Thank you very much. I'll stop here and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Sridhar. I think we'll just do the presentations first, and then kind of take questions after that. If that is okay. We'll So I'll move on to. Thank you very much, Sridhar. We'll move on to Priya now.
Thank you, Ruchira, and Sridhar for that interesting presentation on Adani. I've been researching Adani and land grab in the southern state of Tamil Nadu, and one is not surprised at all to find that the tactics that Adani use in mining are very similar to the tactics that they've been using in renewables also in India. I'll come to that and speak about it very briefly. But before I go there, I'd like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to share my thoughts on land grab and the politics around land grab in India. I've been particularly working in the central Indian belt, in Madhya Pradesh, which is one of the states in the central Indian belt, around coal mining. That's what I've been doing for most part of my my work time, and was fighting against a coal mine in a forested area in a region known as Mahan, which is in the Madhya Pradesh state. But before I go there, I'll just, before I share with you the Mahan story, I'll just share screen and share with you quickly. Can you see my screen, all of you? Okay.
Yes.
So as Ruchira had shared in her first slide, and Sridhar also touched, the whole debate in India basically is the whole debate in the mining, land grab, forest, indigenous community rights area in India centers around the whole thing of this economic growth based development model and the conflict that it brings about basically. So this is an image from Singrauli district of Madhya Pradesh that you see, where you can see the forested region at the back, and then this is basically an intersection of a mine. And when I went into this region almost 12 to 13 years ago, this forest was very much there, and lots of forest dependent communities were living in these forests. And we've seen this mine, this is a Reliance mine, basically come up in this region and destroy the lives and livelihoods of thousands of people. Reliance built the Sasan Alta mega power plant in that region, displacing many people for the power plant as well as the mine. And this is the location where the mine is situated. And I remember going into these forests and I was very new to the region, and going into this forest and talking to an indigenous community member who was yet to be displaced, but of course he was being moved away from the forest. And what he told me is something that stayed with me for years and years and continues to kind of haunt me in some ways. And when we were, he mistook me to be a government official who would come to kind of negotiate his land acquisition process. And he said that that I can't fight the company. I will have to give up my land to the company, but my only request is please put me in another forest. I don't know how to live in any other place other than a forest. That's the only place where I can live. And this is this I think this thing that that Vikram Singh ji said, is the whole conflict, where you have indigenous communities that depend on forests and forest land for their lives and livelihoods, and then you have these big corporations that come in and mine lands and forests for coal, for bauxite, for iron ore, and now take away land for solar as well. So this whole debate of environment versus development is at the heart of all conflicts in India. This slide I want earlier Sridhar was talking about Jharkhand, where the Adani mine is situated, is this part of India. This is a central Indian belt, basically. This is India, and you see this box here, and this is this is zooming into that box, basically. These states, that is Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Orissa, Maharashtra, these are the states that are situated in the central part of India. This is also the region which has a lot of minerals. So there's iron ore, there's bauxite, there's coal, most importantly, and this region also has an overlap with forests as well as indigenous community habitat. So a large number of indigenous community members live in this part of the country. And you will find that most of the conflicts around mines are also, situated in this belt. And this belt, especially Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Orissa, these regions have seen very, bloody fights, which has resulted in loss of lives. It's resulted in people's rights being violated, land being forcefully taken away from people, no rule of law whatsoever being followed on the ground at all. It's like the Wild West, where there's no law actually applies. So to give you a very, a quick flavor of what really happens when land acquisition kicks in and when land is taken away from people and when people protest against the land acquisition, I wanted to run you through this video. Sridhar knows this video very well, I'm sure. Andrew, can you please play the video now? I'll stop screen share. So this video is from Badka Gaon in Jharkhand. Basically, I think that's the region that Sridhar referred to in his presentation too. And this is a place where there was a mine owned by the government, which was basically taking away land of communities. And there was a police firing when people protested against the land acquisition. There was police firing, which killed 4 people, including 3 minors, 2 minors actually, and 1 19-year-old. And of the 4 people who died, none of them were part of the protests. They were all people who were passing by the protests and children who were going to school, who got caught in the mayhem and died. So I remember going into this region on a fact-finding mission almost a week and a half after this incident. And you could sense, you could sense the amount of repression that had happened, in that region. There was a police firing, and post that every day there was police hunting down people, running through people's houses. People were sleeping in fields for days. They had left off their homes. Women with children were sleeping in adjacent rice fields and not going back into their house for fear of the fact that they would be repressed again and again. And I wanted you to see this. So so Andrew, can you just play this video?
सब है, सब इधर खेत की तरफ भागा हुआ है। टोटल खेत में भागा हुआ है। ठीक है, रखो, अभी रखो, हम बाद में बात करेंगे अभी, क्योंकि बात कुछ और।
चुपचाप बैठे हुए थे। उसके बाद इन लोग देखे लगे कौन फाटक को मार रहा है। उसके बाद जो हमको चढ़ा उधर से मारना शुरू किया, हमको मारना शुरू किया। हम बोल रहे हैं देखिए हुजूर, हमका हाथ टूटा हुआ, हम ऑपरेशन भी हुआ है पेट का, हम मजबूर होकर बैठे हुए हैं चुपचाप, हमको कुछ ना कुछ। जब दोहरी मारने लगा हमको, तो देखिए पैर फूल गया है, हाथ देखिए टूटा हुआ, इसमें मार दिया पूरा। बच्चा लोग को हमारा सब घर का बेटी बहू है, कोई बाहरी आदमी नहीं है। और हम सब पोता लोग चारों लड़का का लड़का है। बड़ा लड़का जो है मास्टर है, और वो मास्टर से आकर के अभी घर में सोया हुआ और उसको निकाल करके मारा है।
So that video was actually shot by the Wire correspondent, when he was there, covering some of this violence. And so I hope that video gives you a perspective of what really happens on the ground when land acquisition happens, in India. And this video from Barkagaon is true of most regions in India, whether it's Mahan, whether it's Chhattisgarh, any other part in Chhattisgarh. This is the same story actually. So if 1 second, I'll just share the screen again, and that was the video. So coming to the Mahan fight, this is another region, in where we've been fighting against a coal mine. And Sridhar was talking about the Land Acquisition Act. I want to basically talk about the Forest Rights Act, which is another legislation that has been, of course, changed, or there's been a lot of dilution in most of these legislations post 2014. After the current government came to power, we have seen a systematic dilution of all kinds of environmental regulatory frameworks that have been put in place, over the years, to at least ensure that some processes were followed, when land was being acquired, or when forest land is, being diverted for non-forest uses like developmental projects. And what we saw in Mahan was, again, another kind of, so one is this possible, acquisition where you are beaten up, there's police firing, the police force comes in large numbers and lays siege to your village, and you are picked up and beaten up and arrested. So that's one kind of acquisition issue, that land grab that you see, which is very forceful and regressive and aggressive actually. Another kind of land grab is basically land grab that happens using forging documents, say for example, and that's the Mahan story, where we have seen that that this project to mine 1,182 hectares of forest land had got clearance on paper, and everything that was happening was on paper. And when we started, tracing down the paperwork and looking, because as Sridhar said, and even in that other video that we saw, there are no public hearings, or when there are public hearings, no processes are followed, So every process is laid down on paper, but on the ground, what you see is diametrically opposite, and a process that's diametrically opposite to what's written on the paper. So there was no public hearings, for example, in Mahan. And the law lays down, the Forest Rights Act clearly lays down that there should be the consent of all the communities, living in and around in all these village councils should be obtained before any mining process is started, either in the forest or in the villages in and around the forest. And in Mahan, what happened is that on paper, all of this was very clean and clear. There were signatures forged, from village councils. So what they had done is basically they'd taken out the voters list, or the register that has the names of all the voters in that village, and they just copied that list, and they put so basically a lot of people here in this region are illiterate, so they don't sign on a document. What they do is basically put a thumb impression on the document. So what had happened is in that document, they had actually forged thumb impressions of 1,125 people, which was the required quorum to divert the land. And we had to fight an 8-year-long battle to kind of prove that these documents, that large-scale forgery had happened. We'd kind of filed under the Right to Information Act. We'd filed applications, and we had got information. We got death certificates of people, because this whole document had 7 people who were dead on the date of the resolution, and their signatures were there. There were 2 people who were serving a jail sentence for murder, and their signatures were also in this document. So we gathered a lot of evidence to kind of challenge this whole process, and we filed a case in the National Green Tribunal, which looks at clearances and environmental cases at the national level in India. And we filed a case there, and we challenged the clearances granted to this case. Now we know that this kind of land grab using forged documents, using consent is there in the law. Like compared to, if you look at Australia, the Native Title Act doesn't, I would say, is not as progressive as the Forest Rights Act, because Forest Rights Act is very clear on how you will divert forest land for non-forest use. But that process, when on paper looks great, but when it's implemented on the ground, there's a lot of problem. And that is the forgery and the nexus between the government, the administration, the local police, and the company officials is a very important thing that happens on the ground in every developmental project in this country, where people are fooled and their land is taken away from them. Again, I'm sure all of you've heard about the Niyamgiri story of how the people of Niyamgiri have really fought against Vedanta, which is again another big mining giant, who were out to mine bauxite in the sacred hills of Niyamgiri, and how, despite the fact that the process laid down under the Forest Rights Act was followed in those villages under a Supreme Court watch. There was a case that went to the Supreme Court, and the community and the movement on the ground was successful in kind of getting the whole process of the Gram Sabha, the village council resolutions process to be kind of rolled out properly on the ground in the presence of, or under the watchful eye of the Supreme Court. But despite having, used a legal process to throw out a mining giant, this image on the right hand of Kuni Sikaka. She was one of she's the daughters of one of daughters-in-law. She's a daughter-in-law of one of the ground leaders, and she herself was engaged in this ground fight. And despite the Supreme Court, basically, which is the highest court in the country, saying that Vedanta cannot go ahead and mine the forests because the decision lay with the people of that region, and the people of the region did not give consent to mine. Despite that, having won that battle in court, you will see that even today, like Kuni Sikaka, I think 2-3 years ago, she was picked up by security forces and the police and was tortured for 3 days, and she was presented as a left-wing member of an left-wing extremist group. So and Kuni is just one person. I think many people in the Niyamgiri struggle are facing this thing where the entire fight or the movement on the ground is branded as a left-wing extremist group, and then they are made to they are tortured, they are arrested, their false cases are built on them. We've seen so many cases of repression. The most recent being Sudha Bharadwaj, who's been a very close friend of ours and who's been again working in Chhattisgarh. She's been a lawyer who's been very actively challenging these mining giants in Chhattisgarh through a process of law. And we've seen how the law has been used to frame, all these activists and community members. We've had cases where, entire villages in Jharkhand have been booked, including 13-year-old children have been booked, for sedition. Lots of cases where people have been fighting, mining companies. They are being charged under UAPA, which is Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. So these kind of, repression is used as a tool to kind of to quelch or to suppress voices who are dissenting. So that's on fossil fuel and the huge repression that one has seen on that front. I just want to quickly, I know I'm running out of time, but I want to quickly run you through also what's happening on the renewables front. India is taking a leadership role in the Paris Agreement. India has agreed to, has committed to a 175 gigawatt of renewable in its energy mix. Even as we have committed to this, and the way that the government sees this, that sees India achieving that target is through large-scale renewable energy projects. Now, the same Adani that's there in Australia, the same Adani that Sridhar was talking about earlier in Jharkhand, engaging in land grab for a mine, is also grabbing land in the southern state of Tamil Nadu, where they have set up the world's largest single operator solar plant. And the modus operandi again is a different style, here, where they forged documents again, where they've used power of attorneys to buy off land, making people believe that people really thought that they were leasing out their land for a meager amount of 10,000 rupees. And what they were actually doing was signing on to a power of attorney, which was then used to sell off their land to 4 different people. And finally, you will see that those 2 images are from, people whose land has been, those multiple sale deeds you see stacked up, So all these sale deeds ended up in the end with the land being transferred to Kamudi Power Limited, which is the Adani group there. So one sees another kind of land grab, which is being overtaken even in renewables on a large scale. And we're not talking about a small land. We are talking about 4,000 acres of land from farmers, that is being taken away, snatched away from them by fooling them like this. Again, this is an image from Pavagada in Karnataka. On the right-hand side, you see this is a boundary of a huge thermal power park, a solar park which has multiple, smaller private producers. This park was another kind of a model wherein land was leased from farmers in this region for a period of 28 years, wherein there was an agreement to give them 21,000 per year. And that's the boundary wall that you see, that around this 13,000 acres of land that has been leased from farmers, there is a boundary wall. So on the left, you see this lady, she's landless, sheep and goat rearer, in those villages. So in these villages, the composition is that, the upper caste or the rich are the most landed, and then you have, the middle income farmers who own less than, say, 5 acres of land, and then you have the landless people. So she belongs to the landless class, and her means of earning livelihoods was basically rearing sheep and goat. And this entire region, 13,000 acres being cordoned off, meant that she had to actually sell off her sheep, or she had to just go off with her sheep for months, migrate, because this whole land there was common land, there was a lot of common land available for grazing sheep and goats, and that land is now not available now. So what I am trying to kind of share with you is that in India, where there is a big conflict between development and environment, where there is a big push for moving from fossil fuel to renewables in a big way, putting climate change at the center of the debate. The whole element of justice, where does that stand? The whole element of rule of law, where does that stand? How there is a strong, one sees through all of these cases and stories, and these are just representative cases. Every story out there has a similar pattern of a strong nexus between the government, the police, and the corporation. And that nexus goes right up to our Prime Minister, who comes to take his oath in a corporate-owned helicopter. So in this political backdrop, we have seen how rights of communities have been violated, how forests have been violated, how the environment has been violated, and there's been large-scale land grab, and we've seen how the government has facilitated to a great extent this whole process of land grab, which has been happening in different manners. The way it manifests is very different, but it's all land grab. For me, even that boundary wall being built is on community land is basically putting communities off the limits of that land, which means their livelihoods are impacted. Their access to that community land is totally, taken away, which again is a kind of, grab, of community land, which is also a large amount of land in India is basically bifurcated as, wasteland and community-owned land, which there's nothing that is followed there. So yeah, I hope I've been able to give you a very broad picture of the kind of land grab that happens in this country, and the main elements that play, the stakeholders that play a push and pull role in this whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya, for your impassioned and your rich presentation. And thank you, both of you, for the work that you do. We're probably kind of getting into audience question time, but I'll still very briefly pose 3 questions. Just want to put in a little bit of a comparative context, because sometimes my feeling is that when people try to understand what's going on in India, it gets too overwhelming. You can get lost in the details. It's just lost in the range and scale of everything that is going on. So over time, interestingly enough, the last 20 years have seen extreme ecological change and destruction in Australia because of the resource boom. In India, the neoliberal development has very similar timescales, and it has seen enormous amounts of ecological and social transformation with, of course, very varying levels of impact. And a top-level question for anyone attending the session can be, why are Indian activists who come to a session on mining and extractivism talking about only about land displacement? Why aren't they talking about environmental pollution and kind of from mining? Why are they primarily talking about land displacement? And why are they also talking about renewables and thermal power plants? So it just kind of, from both of your presentations, it just goes to show that that is the first and foremost problem, is the violence, the corruption, the violation of laws that the government itself has put in place to take land from people. And because India is a lived landscape of peasant and livelihood communities, that is where the most conflict is. So basically, my first, it's not so much of a question as a, so basically what I want to ask is, at the same time that environmental conflict over mining or all other kinds of projects related to land grab has increased, India has also passed the two of the most progressive legislations, which is the new Land Acquisition and Compensation Act and the Forest Rights Act, which can be said to be equivalent to the Native Title Act, but more progressive. So I think there's something that we don't discuss. I want to ask both of you, looking at the time scale of the last 20 years, there have been a lot of bad things. What are some of the good things that have endured, if they have at all, when it relates to mining-related conflict and dispossession on the ground of communities, if you can think of? Priya and then Sridhar. Specifically in terms of in places like you did talk about the Dongria Khan, but even, they are facing threats. But the point is, if you can think of examples where people have been able to hold on to rights, or kind of, nature has been protected and community rights have been protected, or something on that scale.
Yeah, so while I think I've painted a very bleak picture out there, because the picture is very bleak, but it's not that there are no silver linings. I think having been part of so many movements, in a repressive state like India, I think the silver lining has been the Niyamgiris, has been the progressive legislations that had come out, and they continue to be, these multiple tiny dotted movements across the country against these processes. And what we have perhaps shared is I think what I have tried to share here is more of the repression that people face. But we shouldn't fail to remember the fact that there are lots of small wins that communities have had, and they continue to fight. There are lots of small movements that hold their ground and have not parted with their land, and continue to fight using this broken system, actually. And as you said, Ruchira, the Forest Rights Act is an important tool. The Right to Information Act, which was passed, for example, which is an important tool that we have at our disposal, which we can use to to fight these mining corporations. There is the Land Acquisition Act and the changes that were brought about in that act. And then there is the people's movements, but the sad thing has been that there is, like, if you see post the current government, post the current government taking on, basically in 2014, the first thing this government did, one of the first things, is that it appointed the TSR Subramaniam committee to dilute all the 5 environmental laws. So basically, what the government did was to basically open up single window clearances to facilitate corporate takeover of resources, that whole process. And I think that is something that people have been fighting, the dilutions in the existing regulatory framework, which actually takes away from us some of the important and progressive legislations that were put in place to save forests, livelihoods, as well as land and other resources. And as you say, Ruchira, I just feel that, whenever we talk about climate change and environment, often this question comes up that, why are you not talking about climate change? And why do you talk about, say, land acquisition or forest rights? I think the battle against climate change in India is a proxy battle that's fought through, these social justice movements. And one needs to understand that unlike in the global north, the climate movement in India is very different, you know. So every Niyamgiri fight that saves a patch of forest is also saving an entire carbon sink, you know. Of course, the way it manifests on the ground is basically fighting against land acquisition, fighting against using tools like the Forest Rights Act and communities' rights over forests. But in essence, what it's doing is keeping coal below the soil, you know, at the end of the day, which means that, you know, it is helping us not burn carbon and add to the carbon emissions. And what it's doing in these forested areas is to protect these forests, you know, which are essential carbon sinks. So I think there is a difference in the environmental movement and the way, you know, environmental movements have been framed, you know, in the northern perspective as well as in the southern perspective. From the Indian perspective, it's definitely, you know, these battles that are against these mining barons that are actually at the front line of also the environmental justice movements of the country, and which is very heartening actually. So the fight is not just against land acquisition; it is also a step towards, you know, a climate justice, I think. And Sridhar will add.
Yeah, Sridhar, I just wanted to just pick on that point, Priya. You said that I think we could find parallels with indigenous justice movements in the global north and settler colonial societies like Australia, and they would compare to what the fights are for on the ground in India in terms of rights, strengthening rights, kind of basically redressing historical justice. And that is the mechanism through which you talk about climate justice, with the difference being that in India we don't talk explicitly about climate justice in the way that indigenous communities here do, and they connect with the historic injustices. So Sridhar, would you like to respond?
Yeah, one is, you know, some of these so-called progressive legislations that we have been talking about. If we think about when they were, you know, when these laws came in, this was a short period when the left was a part of the government. So this is a very important kind of a thing that we often miss. In a long history of India, in the central government, the left parties have never been in power. But though they did not be a part of the government, but they were supporting the government. And during that period only, the Right to Information Act, the Forest Rights Act, and the what I would say the foreground for the land acquisition law, and also even the some of the changes where the district mineral foundation and stakes to local mining affected communities, all these were discussed. So this is an important thing that we need to keep in mind, and also it tells us that even if there is a if there is a small kind of a group of left which was in power, it did have influence over some of these progressive laws. So one is that. The second is that the biggest crisis in India is between what are laws and how they are implemented. In India, I often say in the last 3 decades when I have been struggling with courts and several other things, the real reflection of law is like, you tell me your name, you tell me who you are, and then I'll tell you what law applies to you and how it will apply to you. So, the laws do not apply evenly with people. So, those people who have, for instance, if there is a powerful community in urban areas where, a metro line might be going, and, they would twist the metro line to go over a slum or something like that, it's possible. But if the same thing, slum dweller wants to, fight on that same metro line, the law will apply to him differently. So that's the biggest bane that we are facing. And from 2014, we have been moving towards, a mad rush towards, improving our standards in the ease of doing business rankings of the World Bank, which itself, the World Bank itself has now realized is a flawed kind of an indicator. And today it is beyond this race towards the bottom. It's like, in fact, making use of this COVID, kind of economic downturn, the government is giving away things to the corporates at such a concession that, there are coal blocks being allotted to companies which never had any turnover at all. It did not have any, experience in coal mining, but then it's giving away resources to, large corporates. It's selling off almost all the, like public sector units to, the large companies. Then, we have a huge non-performing assets in banks. 85%, very recent, day before yesterday, a report came up and said 85% of that non-performing assets is because of our industry, large industry and large, manufacturing and other industry, and not the retail or the farmers' loans. It was these industries which are supposed to be, developing our economy that are actually bringing us into a bad shape. So, so these are the kind of contradictions that we are living with. And of course, today there is not a single inch of land in rural India that the government can just take it away. They are challenged. There is protest on the ground, and it is people are beaten, or people go to courts. People do all kinds of things. That's why they are trying to make it more easier. Like, for instance, already auction it and create a kind of kind of goodwill for the community, for the company, because they've already paid money to the state government, so that they can push the people further. So, it's not very easy today for anybody to acquire land in India, and people are on the ground protesting.
Yeah. So it's a combination of, on the one hand, there is more of taking away of land for projects. On the other hand, there is also a series of mechanisms and people are fighting. Hence, India at this point of time has the highest number of environmental conflicts in the world, according to the Earth Justice Atlas. I forget the number, but it's the highest in the world. So, well, we are number one in something. The last question, we have to get into audience questions, but this one kind of reflects what people are asking as well. Let's make this a rapid fire 1 minute. So given that we're talking about having this conversation in Australia, and there is of course an Australian-Indian connection with, thanks to Adani. But I kind of also want to ask this, generally speaking, given India's conflicted environmental mining space and given the crackdown on activists, given the violence on the ground, and Priya, you yourself have been in this, kind of the eye of the storm. What are the opportunities and what are the challenges for international solidarity and collaborations? Let's make it 1 minute rapid fire, each of you, and then we'll move to audience questions. Sridhar, you want to go first? Opportunities and challenges, rather risks, opportunities and risks of international solidarity and collaboration.
There are two kinds of things. One is, international solidarity is extremely necessary because, see today, investments are cross-border, technologies, companies are cross-border. So we need cross-border solidarity. At the same time, sometimes, with the nature of the Indian government, and particularly the current government, if it thinks that, something is emerging from outside, and especially asking, for changes in India, it starts, kind of acting weirdly, and, going around and, hurting the local communities even further, as if they were the people who invited the international agency to come and intervene on their behalf. So it's a very, very tricky kind of situation. But I would definitely think that given the nature of the beast, we need, strong international collaboration.
Thank you. Priya?
Yes, definitely. I think totally in agreement with Sridhar. Seeing the kind of companies that we are facing, they are registered in different countries. They are operating from different cities across the globe. I think with globalization, we did not only open up markets. I think the whole thing of violations and human rights is also something that needs to move beyond geographical boundaries. And I think particularly with the current government, one has seen that this thing of if I don't think this current government reacts to anything, but definitely it does feel a little cornered, when people from other countries, or when the Guardian, or you have all these international newspapers running stories, there is a bit of a wee bit of a pressure that the government faces, in some ways. And I think that should be used more and more as a strategy, and not because the government feels shame, but I think these solidarities matter for everybody. I think across countries, whether it's India or Brazil or Australia, or even the US, there is always a little bit of India everywhere. I see, the communities that face violence, there are communities everywhere, and there needs to be a solidarity of people who are fighting against this kind of repression, against corporations, against human right violations. There definitely needs to be a solidarity beyond boundaries.
Thank you, Priya, and thank you, Sridhar, for that. So it is basically a catch-22 situation. Can we, sorry, it's my fault that I have this. It is a catch-22 situation. At the same time, international collaborations are needed. So I'm going to move on to some audience questions. Pardon my stupidity, but Apsara, for some reason, I can't scroll down in the Google document. So I can only see the first few questions. I'm not able to scroll down. While I figure that out, I think, while we are on this, and this has come up in a few questions, this is a consistent theme. We also touched on this. I'll just contextualize the question slightly. So my own impression of the economic assessment and the coal versus renewables debate is that financial figures are critical and important. But when we just throw numbers at India and talk about solar growth, and that's the way we actually mask some of the critical issues of violence and injustice on the ground, which is related to land dispossession. Given that the kind of environmental commentary that does come towards India is split along that coal versus renewables line, because that is obviously the global crisis. And that's also a very dominant frame in Australia, kind of many other parts of the world, and the economic assessment done by people from these places. It doesn't really capture the justice landscape of India. I want to basically, there's a question about the government giving Adani the tender for, kind of the solar plant. Well, we know that Adani is now the largest kind of solar developer in the world. And that just means a lot of land and large scale solar. I want to ask both of you basically, as activists working on the ground in India, but very cognizant of all the layers of discussions on climate, on renewables and coal and everything, how would you frame the coal versus renewables debate for India in a way that it centers justice for people on the ground?
If I can go ahead first, Ruchira, what we've been saying is, unless we are looking at an end-use oriented and distributed energy generation, just merely shifting from, coal to solar does not really solve the problem, because solar also has its own kind of mining implications, several other implications. So what we are saying is it's not, we need a more distributed model for what are the energy needs for what purposes it is required. And there are elegant ways to reach that. For instance, in rural India today, it doesn't make sense to import natural gas, then bottle it into gas cylinders and deliver it, and paternalistically say that rich people give it up, and the poor in rural areas will get gas cylinders. Because biogas is an excellent and wonderfully viable technology, and with the kind of livestock and livestock management in rural India, if a proper biogas management is done, cooking energy needs can be very easily taken care. So we have, we need to look at what is the end use of that energy and what kind of source is best suited to it in the context of planning it in a distributed manner. But governments are always looking for a convenient way of dealing with it. And also, I say that if you look at decisions taken by the government in India, it has to be convenient for the politics, convenient for the bureaucrats. It needs to provide commission at different levels, kickbacks or commissions at different levels. And, it doesn't care whether there are conflicts with the community. That is the kind of unfortunate situation we have. So to recollect, it has to be a distributed, end-use oriented energy model. That's the only thing that will lead towards a just transition.
Priya?
Yeah, so again, the model that works, so for every megawatt of solar energy produced, an average of 2 to 2.5 hectares of land is required, depending on the configuration, basically. So if you look at solar, it's that land intensive. And if India is thinking of making a shift from fossil fuel to renewables, that shift is going to be majorly focused on large scale solar, then we know where the conflict area is. Land is scarce, and there will be conflicts, more and more conflicts around this. Now, the whole thing of what kind of shift, which you said, as Sridhar said, the shift needs to be decentralized renewable energy. Right now, the whole thing of, even solar is like, you produce, upload to the centralized grid and then distribute kind of a system is not what will work for India. It has to be a system where, energy is produced in a smaller cluster and distributed there itself. So that is because even as we talk, there are these, it's not just about access to energy, right? There is inequitable distribution of energy. Even when energy is there, sufficient energy is there, why is it that a lot of rural areas do not get that energy? Because, cities, it's siphoned off to cities and industries, so there is this whole thing of, inequitable distribution. The other thing is also, who in the long run, when we are talking about justice, we know that this transition needs to be a just transition, because you cannot talk about climate without, and achieving climate change, solutions to climate change issues without putting justice at the center of this debate. So we can't say we will keep on displacing people, we will keep on, snatching away livelihoods of people, and we will deliver. So as Sridhar was saying, moving, say for example, capital from one area that is fossil fuel and pulling it back and investing it in renewables is not going to solve the issue. It's not as simple as that. So there is an entire element of justice that is at the heart of this debate, and that needs to be addressed. So as long as we don't address the justice element, and how will you address that? There is this larger inequitable distribution, but there's also this larger question of, who owns the future energy systems? Where does the ownership lie? Are we still going to operate in this capitalist system that is so that is so discriminatory, that is creating more inequalities, that is so resource dependent, and all of that? Or are we looking at our future energy systems being more democratic? Are we talking of, say, producer companies, of owning decentralized renewable energy systems? Are we talking of cooperatives, of communities owning those systems? What say and ownership does the community and people who have who this resources belongs to, what say do they have in this whole development, production and distribution and ownership of the future energy systems of the country? That, where does the decision making lie? I think unless we address some of these questions, we will be committing the same mistakes that we did with fossil fuel. And this is a systemic issue. Like we have to, and you have to, and the solutions to systemic issues are not easy, but it's not that there is no system, right? When we are talking about climate change, it's such a mammoth issue. I think the solutions to climate change do not lie in the capitalist system. Somewhere I am, because this system believes in making profits by exploiting resources, by exploiting the environment, exploiting labor, and exploiting communities, right? So somewhere we need to move away from that system. And I think we need to, there are lots of justice related issues, there are ownership and decentralized democracy related issues that need to come to the forefront if we are kind of thinking of redesigning the future energy system for our country.
So in a way, I'll just kind of bring it back to the context of the global North versus South. In a way, these are principles that I think everyone agrees with, whoever's working on climate justice. But the thing is, it just becomes that much more critical to do it in a context like India, to do it in the context of the global South, where this, again, I mean, as you said, it could become like, well, it could, in India, we have had waves of displacement because of large dams to provide hydroelectricity, then fossil fuel projects, coal projects, and then solar could be. So the thing is about the criticality of an entirely different approach in a context like India, and for those narratives and those nuances to be also understood by the global community. In Australia, there are principles of Indigenous justice within the renewable framework, but the thing is, in Australia, we still talk about massive land scale for projects, and that is in a way not directly harmful because people are not moved off the land for those things. I mean, and that is a fundamental difference, I guess, between a context like Australia and India. We have to understand in terms of how it changes the ground and how it affects people on the ground. So I think that probably captures the question the person had on Adani and the solar plant, because I just wanted to frame it in a broader context of what is the issue on the ground, and we can understand the scales of projects of Adani, and Adani being kind of responsible for the kind of land displacement amongst other things that the company is. We know that what that means. So the next question is, so it's going to be, it's probably going to be a long list of groups to name, but people are interested to understand about groups working with communities on the ground in India and how they can be supported. I think kind of both, kind of Sridhar and Priya, you are kind of a part of a wider network. Just kind of name some of the big groups who work on the ground, and also again how they have been, they have benefited from international collaborations. I think that can just give us a sense of the broader scale of community that can exist. Priya, you want to start this off? Yeah.
So I think within the country there is a strong network that's there. Sridhar has been founding member of the Mines, Minerals and People Network, which has been focusing on some of these issues. There is the National Alliance of People's Movements, which is basically a loose alliance of all kinds of movements, against infrastructure projects, against mining projects, against urban displacement and all of that. There are, I think it's not the lack of the movements. I think if I critically look at it, there is, of course, I think most movements on the ground, because of the kind of repression that you saw, you are constantly engaged in firefighting, and your battle is to survive today, So I think somewhere we also need to kind of build more linkages and support each other, both within the country, which is happening, as well as beyond the boundaries of this country. If I look at, some examples of successful movements that have benefited from international alliances, like the whole Niyamgiri, the Stop Vedanta, campaign, Foil Vedanta campaign that has been based out of UK, where Vedanta is registered. We've seen how they've kind of worked. There are lots of such examples where where there's been support, and I think particularly when we look at Adani in particular, I think there is a scope to kind of link communities in both Australia and India, because they're fighting against this common mining giant, who's destroying the environment both here and affecting rights of communities both here as well as in Australia. So I think there is a lot of opportunity out there to build those linkages, and I think movements on both sides benefit from these linkages, benefit thinking through strategies that work, learning from each other, sharing their learning. So there is a lot of opportunity out there to kind of work across geographic borders, basically.
Thank you. Sridhar, when you answer, can you also specifically think of other ways that Australian activists fighting Adani can better collaborate with the Indian fight while you answer this question?
Yeah. No, essentially, there have been almost all the larger projects where there is a linkage. For instance, Priya mentioned about Vedanta. It had a linkage, and then one of the biggest struggles and victories has been the POSCO movement, where the Korean giant POSCO was not allowed to mine and established the steel plant in Orissa, which is a decade-long fight, and now an Indian company is trying to do that. There also we had a lot of support from the Koreans, groups in Korea which continue to have pressure on the Korean government. So definitely there is a huge kind of
anti-nuclear movement.
So we definitely see there is a lot of scope, and also certain groups have specialized knowledge and interest. For instance, in the case of Niyamgiri, the Survival International, looking at like indigenous communities and particularly vulnerable groups, as we call in India. Similarly, the Amnesty International, which has the human rights dimension. So, different kinds of groups and, international collaboration is definitely very helpful and strong. And in the context of Adani, it's even more necessary because it's not only, the kind of implications it has to a variety of communities in Australia. It's the indigenous communities, it's the coastal communities, similarly coastal communities and indigenous communities. The reality is India is now sitting on a surplus of nearly 40 gigawatts of power. So there is no requirement for a new power plant to be established. And then the second thing is, like we have been very closely working with the Bangladesh groups also. In Bangladesh also, there is already excess power that they are paying nearly 2.7 billion as what we call as the power backdown cost. That is power purchase agreements where power is not being used, but we are paying for the capital costs. So Bangladesh also doesn't actually need this power. But because of whatever geopolitics or whatever bilateral politics that we have, that we are trying to push this project, therefore, it requires only some concerted effort and push both in Australia, India, and Bangladesh to get rid of this Godda project, because it is as I said, it's one of the worst kind of projects that can be conceived of when we are talking about a post-Paris era.
I'd just like to add as well that one of the things that isn't kind of a strong area of focus is that, I mean, the whole Adani project in Australia and Adani in India is just, I mean, it's all because of how keen governments are and bending over backwards. And not enough scrutiny on the Australian government and its friendship with India because of the, you know, the conflict with China, and how the Australian government will say nothing about India's state of democracy and various other things. So there is something there in terms of putting pressure from here, looking at government relations as well, which needs to be considered in the Adani equation. We are out of time, but I just want to ask people if it's okay to ask one more question, which has come through in the audience, which I personally find very interesting. And if that's okay with, you know, people doing the tech support, just hanging in there. And also Priya and Sridhar, if you're okay. I know you have to get back to work. So I think basically I'll just combine two questions and, you know, just kind of answer them together. So one of the questions is about, you know, it appears that, you know, places like India, Brazil, and some other places have inherited colonial systems and they still perpetuate them. And obviously that has, you know, kind of a direct impact on indigenous people. And how do you return to local systems? You might want to talk about the Forest Rights Act in that context, both of you. The other one, just, you know, just combining these two questions, the other one is about China uses the argument of repression to say that it's lifting people out of the poor. Does India do the same? So, you know, kind of, you can just speak to the current context and the narrative that's used by governments. Sridhar?
Of course, the government of India also says that it's been lifting people out of poverty, and, you know, and ever since our, you know, liberalization, privatization, and globalization era, we have. But, you know, all those statistics are, you know, more like a drunkard using a lamppost, more for support rather than for illumination, because there's nothing true about it, you know. So definitely the government of India also talks about it, but, you know, there is no evidence that it has really, you know, helped the, you know, clear, like, kind of taking people out of poverty. The other, you know, aspect is, you know, like the Forest Rights Act in its preamble says it's a historical injustice that we are trying to, you know, reverse. So, in fact, you know, like, I think the Indian administration and the Indian political system is still, you know, kind of in the grip of that colonial thinking. They've never been able to get out of that. And also, you know, that has led to that kind of a paternalistic, you know, kind of attitude of the government in terms of, you know, not only providing SOPs instead of, you know, actually creating conducive atmosphere for people to flourish. The government always thinks that, you know, people have to live on the crumbs that it gives. So that kind of attitude has come, you know, like many in India say that, you know, after the white sahibs went away, the brown sahibs have taken over, and it continues to exist like that. So, you know, I think unless there is a strong change in the mindset of the, you know, political and bureaucratic force, and more questioning by the community, and especially not the rural community, but the more intellectual and educated community to ask these questions, I think it will not be very easy to change.
Priya?
Yeah, I think Sridhar has answered the question. The whole thing of, yes, hiding behind, the India government does it classically, you know, saying jobs, you know, employment generation and jobs is the main thing that you find even in tripartite agreements that, you know, the state, the corporation, as well as the individual enters into when land is being taken away. And it's another story. None of these agreements, which are actually, you know, legal, you know, they're legal agreements, legally enforceable agreements, but none of these agreements are actually respected ever. So you will always find that the dream of development, that if the company comes, there'll be employment opportunities, there'll be schools, there'll be roads, there'll be hospitals. So this dream of development that supposedly will come with these mining, with these corporations, any kind of corporations, is the classic thing that's used even in India. But as Sridhar said, there is hardly any evidence to show that any region, like the region that I work in, which is Singrauli district of Madhya Pradesh, it is in one district alone there are actually 12 mines and 14 thermal power plants, and this is in just one district. And then there are cement plants and other kinds of industry. It's the third most polluted industrial cluster in the country. So with all this development, so-called development, that region has large-scale poverty. The very region that produces 10% of the total coal-based energy of the country, in that region, in the villages where we had fought against the mine, because we fought against the mine and we did not allow the mine to come in. Our villages do not have access to electricity. Some of our villages, like you get, electricity for 2 hours or 3 hours. So this whole dream of development that is sold, to the people when these projects come is something that's a classic thing that's done, I guess, everywhere across the globe. And that is so. Also you will find even in the movements, like for example, in every movement you will have say for example, if you have a group of people who are genuinely fighting for communities and rights and resources against a mine, you will always have another movement that is, a proxy movement that is set up by the state and the corporation, which will have something to do with development in their name, So when in Mahan, we had the Mahan Sangharsh Samiti, which meant that, these are the people who are fighting against the mine. It's you had, an opposition that was built up, by the mining companies and the district administration, which was known as Mahan Vikas Manch, which said it is, and they were speaking about development, and they were opposing this movement, saying that, we want development and we want this company to come because this company, and this is the story in every movement. There is a counter movement that is started on the ground, and this whole so-called development narrative is pushed, down the throat of the community through using, these proxies on the ground. So that is a reality on the ground. In terms of indigenous communities and their knowledge, I think, often in India, that we've always seen this thing of, mainstreaming, indigenous communities, that's the word used by the bureaucracy. That's the word used by a part of the intellectual class, that constantly talks about mainstreaming. And we've always been questioning this whole thing of, like, who decides what the mainstream is? You've decided that you are the people who are right. And then you believe that everybody who is outside of this stream, it needs to come into the stream. But how did you decide that this is the mainstream, of the society? This is because you don't acknowledge, the way of life or the sustainable lives that indigenous communities lead. You do not recognize their knowledge systems. You recognize their knowledge systems, which are so robust and can fight climate change. Instead, you believe that your, development oriented, growth oriented systems, which destroy, the environment and resources, is the mainstream into which they need to be brought. So I think we need to really understand that this whole thing of historical injustice that Sridhar was talking about, is there on many aspects. Even there is a huge cultural invasion into, indigenous communities and their culture. With the current government, you see this whole thing of, trying to say that indigenous communities are Hindus, which they are not. So there is an invasion not just on their land and their resources. There's an invasion into their belief systems. There is an invasion into their identities. There is an invasion into their knowledge systems. And all of this is being trashed. And there needs to be a sustained and consistent effort to say no. There is, you can't decide that this is the mainstream. You can't say that this system that you are pushing is the better system. There is like so I think this needs to be said every single day by a larger number of people out there. And we've had intellectual people sitting and talking about this mainstream and the need to kind of to bring progress to the dark tribal areas of India, and whatnot. So I think we need to really de-learn. I tell myself, as a city-bred person, when I went first to Mahan, my whole journey has been one of de-learning, because there's a learning process that's kind of put into you right from childhood, where you look at things in a particular perspective, and then in order to kind of embrace or understand, acknowledge and respect indigenous communities or other perspectives, you need to be on a journey of de-learning. And I think that journey of de-learning is very important for a lot of people, including a lot of intellectuals, who sit there and talk thinking that they know what is best for other communities.
Okay. Thanks, Priya. I've just posted a link in the chat on Adivasi Lives Matter. And so one of the good things about now and the digital era is there are a lot of young indigenous groups, activists, but just groups. There's a they are able to express online and go online and tell their story, and that really does help cut through that kind of mainstream and this very classist narrative we've had in India. Even ourselves, we're not indigenous, and we speak for them. So they have their own platforms now, and they're building more platforms, and that is an important transition that's required. So I will have to, unfortunately, say thank yous now. I just want to say that there have been a lot of questions, and just shows the level of interest, which is really heartwarming. We could try and answer some of the questions and send some links if people, if people want to know. So if there's a way to, we have the Google Doc for the questions, but I've also sent a lot of links in the chat, which people might find helpful. So if you can save the chat, that would be great. And I can just send out some links as well. And if, I just have to say thank you now, and it's been 15 minutes over, so we'll probably have to say goodbye now. But we could respond to some of the questions later. Can I have the thank you slide, please, Andrew? So I thank Priya and Sridhar for taking the time out from work and giving us a rich, energizing and impassioned account of what goes on the ground in India. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank the tech support team, Andrew Griffiths and Martin Wong, and Apsara Sabaratnam, who talked to me and got me into this conference, and that has made so much of a difference. Thank you very much. And to all of you for coming. I have been in Australia for the last 12 years working on environmental issues, that directly in NGOs or now writing a thesis. I just find the level of interest now and the interest and the willingness to engage really heartwarming. I mean, these are the kinds of conversations we need to have across, the two different hemispheres, the North and the South, Australia and India. So I just love to see more of this. And thank you so much for your interest, and thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your questions. And I thank the Imarc Alliance for giving us the space to discuss some of these serious issues. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, all of you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.